Hello guys and welcome to HudRod Automotive. This is going to be our first sort of podcast video where we're going to talk about the RCord. Where is it, what we're going to do with it, and why hasn't it been on the channel for 3 weeks. So if you enjoy this video, do hit like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So where is the RCord? Simply, it's not running, and Alex is going to tell you all the reasons why that happened, because as you saw in our road trip video, it did have a little bit of a breakdown on the way back.
Yeah, I mean, it's ruined, mate. It's going to the scrapper. No, nothing too serious. But the car is currently, well, sitting alone and awaiting some work from us. And currently sitting with a dead battery, so can't really go anywhere. But there's a few things we need to do to it, which we'll go over. But it's definitely going to come back, and there's nothing major wrong with it. Just need a battery for starters, and we'll go through the rest.
Yeah, she just needs some bit of TLC, because if you didn't watch our episode 3 of the road trip, we will link them below, so do go and check them out. But what basically happened was we were coming, I think it's through the Yorkshire Dales or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And we were going over these passes, obviously having a bit of fun, and the car just started getting slower and slower and slower. And then we sort of felt this over the whole trip, but then we swapped over, because we swapped every couple of hours, and then I got in the car and we sort of went up this hill. And I was doing like 4th gear, and it sort of bogged. I went down to 3rd gear, and it's like, and it just had no power coming up this hill at all.
That's actually perfect to overlay, just right there. It's, if you could, when I did it before you, obviously, and then you swapped over into it, it was getting really bad with me, and then when you got in it, it's really, really bad.
Yeah, that was just like the end of that. End of the cat, because when we got out there was just like white stuff coming out the back, which is obviously the honeycomb mesh inside just disintegrating.
Yeah.
And that was obviously causing a huge restriction, because it was coming out of the flange just before the cat, so obviously it was creating so much back pressure that it wasn't able to obviously scavenge the exhaust, and it has to go somewhere. So there is obviously going to be some potential issues that are going to come with that, because what is basically wrong with the car at the moment? Well, obviously we said the flat battery, but that's just because it's sat for a while. It's going to need, well, we say a new exhaust, but it's pretty much just the cat. We're gonna have to swap that. Unfortunately, obviously Honda ones aren't the cheapest in the world, so we'll have to sort that out. But we just got to get it done. But because we're going to be going to a little spoolie boy at some point in the near future, we might think about what we're going to do with that, because obviously we're going to need a new exhaust system then, so we don't want to buy something that's going to be not capable of handling that either. So we do need to think of that. But at the same time, the brakes are shot. So
yeah, the list is building already. We haven't even started on the turbo stuff yet.
Yeah, but this is the stuff to just get the car working again. This was the whole philosophy of it. As soon as we got the car, was we need to use the car and get fun out of the car, because if we're putting all this money into it, then we need to actually get the enjoyment out of it. Because yes, working on the cars is fun, and as you see, we've already made something like 12 videos on the car, which is like half of all the videos on our channel, but we need to actually be using it and getting the value for the money. So yeah, we're definitely going to need to be spending a little bit, but as I said, this is the stuff just to get it working again.
Well, exactly, yeah. And on that point, you were saying about the old Honda cat. I think possibly the reason it did go was because it had a cheap aftermarket cat in it originally, or when we got it, obviously. And that, ever since we fixed the exhaust, we did hear that slight hiss, didn't we?
And the car was always slow.
Yeah.
Or not necessarily. Okay, no, it was slow, but we always thought, because it's only got like 10 horsepower less than a Type R or whatever. But obviously it's heavier, so we did think, oh yeah, maybe this is the weight. But it's always been a little bit slow, and it did have the exhaust leak before, which may have had some sort of weird issue as well. There's obviously something going on there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason why it's felt slow pretty much since we bought the car.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there's been some condensation and rust in that exhaust in the past, and all of this doesn't really help, does it? And then when we spent a week pretty much every day romping on it, I'd like to believe that cat got pretty hot, and it ended up sounding like a cowbell.
Well, yeah, especially on that last trip up that hill. Well, we're sort of going over the hills, the bit that you were driving.
What a road!
It was so good. We were having a bit of fun, and there was no cars about. It was just us and Tom and Jake behind. And yeah, maybe driving style obviously doesn't help that. But I don't know. It should last a little bit more than that. So I think there was an issue because that was only really the first time we were properly driving the car.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you used it a little bit, maybe to go to work or come down to mine a couple of times. But apart from that, we never really used the car. So to suddenly go 5 days, spirited driving, I can see why it went. But we're going to get that sorted. We're going to have to do something because, as I said, we don't want to put, a sort of stock exhaust together when we're going to be doing something down the line. So we need to think of how we're gonna go around that. But I'm sure we'll get it sorted because we need to get the car back on the road.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Obviously, there's a few things we need to do in order to do that. But as you said, yeah. So we don't want to go down the line of just putting in something that's going to break again, or going to Euro as such, because it's not going to be the cat we're going to keep if we do have a turbocharger on it, because it's going to get even hotter then.
Yeah, one thing we can do is anything obviously we put on to make it stock again, we can sell later on, potentially. So that is an idea, but yeah, we'll get to that. But I think as we sort of started to touch on the road trip, let's have a bit of a talk about how the car actually performed on the road trip. As I mentioned, it was the first proper time that we went for a proper drive with the car, a proper long experience driving the car where you sort of learn what it's like day to day and on a bit of a trip. So how did you feel with the car?
Well, in short, I was astounded. It's such a good car, and it's passed my expectations massively. When we got on the trip, obviously straight away we had quite a big drive up to the Peak District, and that felt like no time at all. It's still a 3 hour something drive, and felt like nothing at all. And then once you got to the Peak District, it handles so much better than it should. And I'd say that's, as much as I love the K-Series engine, or maybe the K-Series not performing as well as it should. However, when you go on to the handling of the car, it's just amazing. And I think we've said that quite a few times. That's really surprised us so much. And I know people might say it's a Michelin's, but we had worn out tyres when we collected it, and it still handled well. What do you think?
Well, in a similar vein to you, it was just a weird experience having a car like this handle well. And I said this when we did the little vlog on the beach of Scoury, and we were just saying, this is like one car that I finally have like proper confidence in having a bit of fun with it. Because even with my car, like it handles pretty well, and I mean it's got a little bit less power, for instance, and that sort of stuff than the RCord, but I don't have like the full confidence just to like send it a little bit. Whereas with the RCord, it just handles so freaking good. I don't know what they did with the suspension on that, but it's just amazing. And also, I mean, we'll get to it a little bit later, but the suspension's not 100% with it. It is like 160,000 miles.
Yeah.
So there's definitely improvements to be made if we want to get some maybe coilovers or something. However, maybe we don't need to because it handles really good. And I think that's actually what made the trip so fun, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't have any engine. Let's just be honest now. We did not have any engine.
Yeah, like 120 horsepower, 130 horsepower.
Especially
probably.
at the end, I think it was even less than that. But yeah, especially we did start to feel that up some hills. But we were quite miserable days, and I wouldn't say suggest to push in the wet, and I don't think we were really pushing as such. But it was still enjoyable. It still had feedback. It still had handling capabilities of that car are just crazy. It takes the bumps and it doesn't, it just absorbs them and keeps you well planted on the road. It's just a completely sorted car for the road, which is just awesome, considering it's an estate. It's an estate. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, the damping is just perfect. So basically when you go into a corner, it sort of rolls over a little bit because obviously it's got quite a bit of weight. But when you get there, it just sort of sits and grips up. And it's such a nice feeling because especially in up in the Highlands, you sort of get these long flowing corners where you sort of have to sit there a little bit. And especially when you're starting to push just a little bit, as I said, the car rolls over, it grips up, and it gives you that feeling, that confidence. It doesn't sort of roll over on itself and get all loose and all weird. It just goes down, the weight gets onto the tyres, and it grips up. So I think if we do have to do any suspension changes, we might just go with stock parts, because some people, they get these cars that, she's not a young girl anymore, she's 16 years old, or people even get like these 90s cars that are like 20 something years old, and they're like, oh, handles like shit. Well, yeah, because everything's worn out because it's so old. If you then go back to stock, you're already going to get an increase in performance. So I think we might end up doing something like that, because for what we want this car to be, which is effectively beating a stock Golf R, that also means we can't go anything too crazy with the RCord, because then that takes away the whole point of it, really, and the whole ability of it to be a daily driver as well. So I think if we just send in some stock bushings, some stock ball joints and that sort of stuff, I think she'll be even better, which is quite remarkable, because this is one of the best handling cars I've ever driven. Like, genuinely, I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, and I'd actually go as far as to say, speaking to Tom recently, he's getting quite annoyed with the firmness of the Type R, and I actually think even after going on the road trip, obviously we've driven a Type R a few times, and I think that RCord was just so good, and everything you'd want from a road trip car. It was comfortable on the motorways, more than comfortable. You had your cruise control, you had heated seats, electric seats. You had everything you wanted, leather, and it was nice, and it was quiet. And on the road, where the bumps and everything, it wasn't uncomfortable. But yet somehow, even though it had a bit of body roll here and there, it still just pushed into the road, and it kept the grip, it kept consistent. It did exactly the same thing every time. You knew what it was going to do. Yeah,
I completely agree with that, actually, because we've always said this, the meat, like the sidewall of the tyre is quite big, which obviously gives you just that extra bit of cushioning as well. And Tom's Type R, I don't know if we will have a photo of it, but the sidewalls are really, really thin. And obviously that just naturally means it's a harder ride, because you don't get that secondary cushion of the tyre. And I do agree. I think that's good. And to be honest, I don't think we need to get a bit of power into it with the turbo to beat the Golf R. But initially one of my ideas I wanted to do with the car is sort of to take it to that next level where it's just rowdy. But then I don't think it's going to need that, because I think with much more horsepower, you're just going to end up going way too fast. So I think also having the less power on that trip has proved that you don't actually need that power to have fun.
That's a very, very good point. But you're briefly touching on it, so let's move on to what is next? What are we going to be doing now with the car?
Well, so obviously the first plan is to fix it once again.
As with every project car.
Yeah, so just get it back to that version 1, because that's what we said before on the trip. We wanted to get a version 1 when it's just a nice car, and it was, but then we broke it again. So we need to get it back to that level. Once it's at that level, we basically have all of the winter, because one thing we wanted to do on the way back for the road trip was to go to Santa Pod, because they had an open session on the Saturday. However, on the Friday when we were coming back was when the car broke. So obviously there was no point going to Santa Pod with the broken car. So we just came home. But we've been looking, and it doesn't seem like there's any drag racing at Santa Pod in December. So I have to see what comes around in January. And also, we wanted to do lap times. So one thing we wanted to do was go to, say, Bedford Autodrome, because that isn't too far away from us. And also it's got quite a lot of runoff, whereas somewhere like Brands Hatch or some of the other British circuits, they have like walls so close. So we want to go to a bit more forgiving one, such as Bedford. But again, there aren't really any track days in December. So we've got basically the whole of December and probably January as well to get the car to a nice level. So one thing that you have to do on the K24s, if you want to start making a bit more power, is you need to increase the rev limiter, because it only revs to like 7.2 or something at the moment. Really low. So you can get them up to easily get them up to like 8.5, and or some people go even higher than that with when they build the heads on them. But to get that high, you have to change the oil pump, because the oil pump on the K24 is some big chonky boy, and it doesn't like to be revved high, whereas the K20 is naturally made to rev higher. So then if we have to do the engine, the oil pump, that probably means the easiest thing is to maybe pull the engine out. We might be able to do it underneath, but it might be easier just to pull the engine. Therefore, if we're pulling the engine, we might as well do some other things, such as the clutch, because the clutch was starting to go a little bit on the road trip. But then if you're doing the clutch, you're then going to do the rear main seal. And then if we're doing stuff with taking off this sump, we maybe get some sort of baffled sump or baffled insert for the sump as well, if we're going to start pushing it a little bit. But then if the engine's out and we got things apart, then we might as well do ARP head studs and head gasket while it's there. So there's all these things that sort of add up, and depending on how far we want to go with it and how far the money goes, we're probably going to end up doing all of that over the next few months, because obviously when we get back to spring and summer, things are going to be opening up hopefully a bit more, and we're going to be able to do some things. But then alongside that, we want to get the ECU and the wiring sorted with that, because then once we get to next summer and we hopefully have the money ready for the turbo, it's going to be basically plug and play to a certain extent, because we're going to have everything sorted. We're going to have, the oil pump, the baffling, the head studs, head gasket. All we're going to have to do is pretty much sort out the plumbing of the turbo system.
That word "might as well" is dangerous word in the world of project cars. But you're right. You're right. As with all project cars, it's going to go down that line where you start doing something, and while you're there, you might as well do something else. Yeah. Which we tell ourselves saves each other time, but we still end up breaking these things anyway. But yeah, so we need to go down that road of making the car solid and making it ready for boost, because we are going down the boost line, obviously, because we want to be making good power. But on that suspension you were going on about, once we do start pushing it, it's going to be a question of, if we do go to the track, it's going to need possibly better suspension for that, because when you're using for that purpose, the rolling and the weight transfer is going to be a little bit different at higher speeds that you're going to be doing on a track. And also along those lines, something we need to fix immediately as well is brakes. So we're going to be going down the stainless steel lines. Don't think we need to upgrade the calipers at all, but brake discs and pads, so EBC, yellow stuff, all that kind of thing. It's all adding up, but this is what it's all about. It's what it's all about.
There's still $2,000 left to spend minimum.
I mean, that's before the turbo, I think. Because
yeah. But that's why we're gonna have to be a little bit careful. So obviously, there might be some people watching who are just like, "Oh, just send a turbo, let go, do this sort of stuff." But we're just normal guys, so we don't have all this money just to chuck into these cars. It is going to have to be a little bit of a process and a little bit of a step. But we obviously do have loads of other cars and loads of other things that we can review and have fun with and drive in the meantime while we're saving up for each step of the car. So I think, so get it back to version 1. Then we do what I'm going to say is like preventative maintenance, or however you want to describe it, where we're going to do the things so we're ready when we have the money to do the turbo kit. Then we are pretty much just going to be able to bolt it straight on. Especially if this was actually quite a good idea by Alex, if we get the ECU and the wiring sorted, and all we have to do with the ECU, for instance, is just change the tune on it. Okay, which is obviously easier said than done in terms of actually making the tune, but at least everything will be there that we can simply just put on the stuff that we need, rather than when we get to it then having to spend a few days doing the pump and the wiring and the head gasket and the head studs and all this sort of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So we want to go in a different way. It's fun to make power on these Hondas with stock and claim that you're making it with stock power and all this stuff, or with a stock block. But ideally, we want to make this quite a heavy car as well. Ideally, we want to make good, nice, reliable power. Yeah, we're just trying to go around it in a bit of a different way. We want to make the engine prepared for the boost. We don't particularly want to just send loads of boost into it and risk blowing it up. Yes, these Honda engines are strong, and that's why everyone likes them. However, we'd rather just do it the right way the first time if we can, and be able to then push on it, and then when we get to a limit where maybe the suspension can't handle it, or we need to do something else to the car, we don't have to constantly dive into the engine to go back to it to upgrade it.
Yeah, I think some bits may be a little bit overkill, because we probably don't need to do head gasket, head studs, oil pump to make what we want, which is probably like mid 300s or maybe low 300s, depending on the fuel situation. We probably don't need to do them, but there's a couple of reasons. One is because it's safe to do so, because that is, as we said, sort of preventative. It's not getting to a point where we blow up a stock engine and be like, oh yeah, let's do this on the second engine. No, we want to, this engine is really good, so we want to keep it like that. Additionally, oh shit, what was I going to say?
Well, I can jump in.
Oh yeah, so additionally, this engine isn't going to be our K series that we go absolutely wild with. We need to learn. We've done a little bit of work on Hondas before and that sort of stuff, but we've never gone this far. So we need to learn what the K series is like. We need to learn a little bit about tuning it and adjusting that sort of stuff. We need to learn how they like certain things, and just chucking loads of stuff on a stock engine isn't necessarily going to be the best way to do that, because we don't have the money just to keep chucking in brand new engines, brand new gearboxes, whatever that we break, or break from being stupid or unnecessary. I would put it that way. I mean, obviously, when we start push on things above stock power, they're going to eventually break. But we need to be smart about it, and eventually, potentially somewhat soon, we'll do a case series that is a little bit mad and is probably more drag related, or speed related. Maybe some point next year if the money comes about for that, because we do have a very good plan. But we want to use the RCord to learn, and then be just a nice sort of daily driver that is really good and shows what we can do at a nice level without going too crazy.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I'd say another part of the RCord, we can be a little bit mixed on our opinions with it. We sometimes want to go one way, we sometimes want to go another way. But one thing we do often want to do with the RCord is use it. We want to use the RCord. We're putting all this money in, we want to get our use out of it. And if we do want to go on a road trip, or we do want to go somewhere far away, we want to go on a track day, we want to be putting some abuse through this car. It's not going to just be, a couple of passes and then you can check it over and everything like this. It's going to be going on a long amount of miles on that engine. So we don't want that engine to be weak at all.
Yeah, so certain things we might go, in terms of the actual building of it, we might go a little bit overkill, but then that's just because we want this to be an absolutely stout car. For instance, next year, when it all opens again, and hopefully everything is able for us to do it, but we obviously want to go to the Nürburgring, because
that's a perfect example. Yeah,
the goal of the car is to be a Golf R. It's the Golf R killer. It's the RCord. That is what is designed, or is being made to do. So to get it to that level, obviously it might be a little bit difficult because we're not 4-wheel drive DSG, but we want to get obviously close to it on the drag strip. We want to get close to it on Nürburgring times. We just want to have a bit of fun with it, really, at, for instance, Bedford in this country. So those sorts of things we want to do. And to do that, we can't have it breaking down and all this sort of stuff all the time.
Exactly.
So we're going to go a little bit overboard in some areas, but then keep the power to a nice level. Because let's be honest, if you're going over like 400 horsepower on the road, you're just going way too fast for what is actually usable. And as we mentioned, or as Alex said a couple of minutes ago, we want to use the car. We want it to be worth the money.
Exactly. And on that point, when we do compare it to a Golf R, if we've got a one-run wonder where we beat it and then we blow it up, it's not really the point. Whereas a Golf R, you could easily take down to the ring, blast it around the ring, and come home. That's the same thing we want to do with our car.
Yeah, I mean, one person who's having a bit of issues, or had issues recently, is Kyle from the Boosted Boys, where he's got a K-Series MR2, and it's unbelievable. I mean, he's running like 8-second passes. He's doing over 160 in the traps, well over 160 in the traps. He's braking it every 2 passes. So he is like, oh yeah, cool, let's go for the MR2 record, but then he breaks it. Then he has to get a new head or whatever and all this sort of stuff. We don't want to be doing that. We are, as I said, going to go down the course of having a rowdy K-Series, but we're not going to be just chucking everything at it to try and get a certain time. We don't want to be fixing a broken car all the time. Okay, yes, it's going to happen, but we don't want to be doing that all the time every couple of passes. But a couple of bits actually we haven't mentioned that we need to do is, well, I guess we kind of talk about the suspension a little bit, but on the same line of that is the engine mounts.
Oh yes,
because
yes.
if we start making a lot more power, there's obviously going to be a lot more twisting of the engine. So we're going to have to go into those a little bit.
Well, they're already twisted, to be honest. That's something we did forget about, because it's so easily to be forgotten about, and so many cars on the road that you do drive, you do realise, or certainly when I get in some of my friends' cars, something they don't even think about, that their gear knob is moving forwards and backwards, and they think that's completely fine.
Yeah, it's not that bad, but the ones from memory, but they're certainly on their way out, having done 160,000 miles. And if we start them pushing power, it's just going to rip them to shreds.
Yeah, I mean, it's enough to be annoying. With the throttle response, you can feel there's a delay between you putting the throttle on and the engine actually moving, and then giving drive, because the engine mounts move so much. Yeah. So it needs to be repaired. It needs to be replaced, but it's just part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're not going to go like solid bushings.
No.
Well, they're not even bushings at that point. Solid mounts. We're not going to do anything crazy like that, because once again, it needs to be a Golf R, which means it needs to be comfortable. It needs to be nice. It needs to be not rattling all over the place.
But even stock mounts are going to be pretty good. You'll be quite surprised. Obviously, those are probably from the factory, 160,000 miles old. Go on.
I was going to say, it's just like the suspension. You might get in the car and be like, oh, this is a bit crap, but it's 160,000 miles old. Of course it's not going to be great. If we put stock engine mounts in there, they'll probably be fine.
But on that point, not to say that 160,000 miles are bad, because even if you had a 16-year-old 60,000 mile Accord, I'd still like to think that there would be a lot of perish on the rubber anyway.
Yeah, age is in many ways just as bad as mileage, because especially with rubber, it's obviously all about the heat that goes through it, and also the moisture, as well as much as obviously the physical movement of driving the engine. So yeah, that's what we're gonna have to look into to 2021, because I think obviously over the next couple of months you're probably going to see it back on the channel a little bit, but yeah, we're not going to be doing anything too crazy just yet, but because we need to get it working, we need to get it good, we need to do the preventative stuff, and as I said, once everything starts opening up a bit in the spring summertime is when we're going to start going a bit crazy. But we need to learn first, and we need to get the experience and knowledge under our belts.
Yeah, exactly. And no, maybe it might not be the craziest thing you've ever seen, but I think it's going to still be very, very cool as a fast wagon. No one else has. Well, I haven't seen a turbo Honda Accord wagon at any show or anything like that.
Yeah, they are really cool cars. But I think that pretty much rounds up what we got to say here for this first podcast with the RCord. So if you do like this sort of stuff, then do let us know in the comments, because obviously with how the times are going, we're not able to always go and work together. So we might be doing a few more bits like this. But I think, that is going to pretty much end it for this first episode of the podcast.
Well, yeah, I mean, very excited about the Honda, and I think it's going to go places, and we should be doing more podcasts like this in the future on different topics. But stick with us. The Honda's coming back, and it's going to come back strong.
Yeah, it's going to be really good indeed. So if you did enjoy this video, then do give us a subscribe and a like if you haven't done so already. And we thank you for watching. But until the next episode of HudRod Automotive, goodbye.